I want to deal with a part of the debate that is manufacturing exceptionalism versus, it's no different than anything else. So you look at, there's an Adam Smith thing where he dismisses certain things as unproductive. Adam Smith and neoclassical economics usually starts off something about Adam Smith. And this is one you don't see people starting off with, that he dismissed a whole set of stuff. Now, we're not included there unless we consider ourselves, it should be men or women of letters. Maybe we consider ourselves buffoons, I don't know. But you see, it's basically the service kinds of things. And at that point in time, maybe the physicians, they were putting leeches onto people. And so maybe he had a good judgment. Then Susan Hockfield, and this is really, I think, the heart of some of the issues. These are Gary Pisano and Early Shi, who are actually, they attend the seminar we give on science and economics. And Sue Helper said, you got to read my book before you, or my little big article before you say anything. Laura Tyson said things, and then Ross Perot. That quote may go back further. People were citing Michael Boskin for it, but Ross Perot preceded Michael Boskin in at least saying, which may be totally false, of course. If I was a really harder working and more time, I would have gotten what are the returns to the computer chip manufacturers versus what are the return to the potato chip manufacturers, and who knows who makes more money. Good system, they should make the same rate of return. So that's the belief that there is something special about manufacturing. The one that I'm going to pick up is the Susan Hockfield thing. It's this big job creation, and then the Pisano and Shi thing. That's right. Oops. Let me see. Oops. No, that was the wrong way. There we go. Did I do that or did you do that? Okay, now I got it under control here. Now there's also skepticism of that claim, and I give a bunch of people. And what you'll quickly see is that indeed, none of these people are what I called your usual invisible hand cleric. These are not right-wing guys who, whatever you say, they'll immediately say, trust the market. John Kay, if people are familiar with, he writes in the FT, but he's associated with the LSE, and so I know him a bit. He's just one of these people you quickly realize thinks independently, is very knowledgeable. He's not a, quote, academic economist in that sense, but he's just real smart. And anytime he says something, you learn, you listen. So he just called it manufacturing fetishism. And then he did, which we had a little bit earlier today, the design of the revenues of the iPhone. And it's like $7 goes to the China for the production, and $493 or whatever it is. That obviously exaggerates when we saw some of the divisions of other places where they had some things. But the vast bulk is designed in California. And then his question is, in some sense, would you, look at yourself in the mirror, rather be designed in California or assembled in China? And the clear thing is, yeah, you want to be designed in California, and that's where the things are. And the point is the intangibles have huge value, and we shouldn't be playing the thing, only if you could drop it, as somebody said this morning, drop it on your foot, and then it's manufacturing. That's not the only thing. I was very surprised to see Joe Stiglitz. Really, he hasn't come out in a strong way, but if I'm reading correctly, what he says is that he thinks, I'm not agreeing with him, he thinks this great transformation into the service sector is equivalent to the great transformation from agriculture to manufacturing, and any policies that are designed to preserve the old order are bad. And he's got some model he gave actually at a meeting of the IEA that I was in China. And so he's certainly, et cetera. Christy Romer, I assume, she just says, no persuasive case. She sees nothing to be persuaded by. Now, Jagdish is a little more, you know him, he's a little more idiosyncratic. And I always think in the back of his mind is whatever it is that increases trade, particularly with India, is good, and everything else gets filtered through that. That may be unfair, and if he were here, he would yell at me, but he's not here. But then he made this very I thought, good point. It's what you consume, not what you produce, that determines the economy. So if we're bringing in good, high-tech products that makes our lives better, rather than assembling it in the U.S., that has a better thing for us as an economy and people, potentially. So there's the skepticism, and it isn't right-wing skepticism. It's a broad set of people who say nothing special about manufacturing. So I asked this skeptical creature, what should I believe? I see people who seem to be pretty plausible on both sides of this question. So this is now my effort to cut through this. Okay, everybody says this a slightly different way, but as economists certainly want to say there's some externality, something that says the social marginal product is better than the private marginal product. And I use the word marginal because it's clear we're not talking about abolishing manufacturing. We're not talking of bringing back manufacturing to where it's 30% of the workforce. These are marginal changes, and we'd like to know. So the one that gets a lot of political traction was this better jobs and wages. And therefore, it's good for workers, good for inequality, and you see that. You do see in some of these things, whatever if we're concerned about poverty, it's going to do poverty. If we're concerned about trade, it's going to do trade. It's sold as a panacea for things. Then there is an issue that I'm going to put a lot of stress on. It does seem to have a higher jobs multiplier. And some of one of the things that was presented this morning, there was a slide that had it as not as a jobs multiplier, but it was input-output connections back to the economy. So it's bigger backward input-output links. And I think that's particularly important in a recovery, that you don't want to have an isolated sector that doesn't feed back that much to the rest. You want to have something that spurs an entire community or something forward. And then there's this other issue, big thing I take very serious, is that the R&D over sales ratio is much higher in manufacturing. They employ large numbers of engineers, so scientists, engineers over employment. Let me just point out that having a disproportionate number of the U.S.'s scientists and engineers is not a thing that's going to, if you expand or you do things in manufacturing, that does not mean it's helping low-wage workers. The immediate demand effect is on scientists and engineers. And so you've got to be very careful about that. And then the spillovers, et cetera, in the green. The faster productivity growth and restore trade balance, I'm not going to deal with too much. I don't take them overly serious arguments. But then I said that's not enough. And you have to have policy tools if you decide that the social marginal product is higher than the private marginal product. And that's called industrial policy. I read one thing in preparation for this where I think it must have been Rob Atkinson wrote this, but where somebody wrote it in his shop, which they were challenging my colleague, Larry Katz, literally to a fist fight. And their claim was anytime you use that industrial policy word, you somehow were a neoclassical nut who was demeaning anything. Well, no, it's industrial policy, and I don't mean it in a demeaning way at all. And then the point here is this came up in this morning's session. I don't see how we can look at any industry in isolation if we're talking about industrial policy. And one of my friends, I said, I'm very suspicious of this, you want to privilege manufacturing. And he said, do you want to see the big banks grow bigger? I said, oh my God, no, I want to shrink them. And then he said, do you want to see the healthcare remain, whatever it is, 50% bigger thing for the same healthcare that they get in Europe? I said, no. He says, well, then you want to shrink them. I said, yes. And he said, well, then what do you think of manufacturing? Because it really is a relative kind of thing. And so that's what I said there. Then for the case there are any conservative guys who think the legal profession is bad, which Adam Smith did agree on that, it looked like, or the government sector. Now, if you want to, the minute you're talking about any policies to change any part, where you think you're going to intervene and change any part of the thing, you're raising the manufacturing, because it's either going to be part of the residual that should be growing, the other sectors, et cetera. So I just said it is really an industrial policy about what society should produce, and I see no reason why society shouldn't think about that, and et cetera. Okay. So now I want to go through some of these special features. I'll just give you my reading, and you'll. So I did this creates better jobs and wages is to me dubious at best. It means I don't believe it. And that's it's too bad Sue Helber's not here because she would disagree and we could have an interesting, someone else may disagree. So I looked at. Yeah, she told me. Yeah, she told me there was it was an excursion to Berkeley. It was too much. And even if you paid, she couldn't do it. And even if she said she paid out of her own money, something they said no. Okay, so be it. So there is some differentials. And in her paper, she uses some regressions produced for the paper. And they do average weekly earnings. And they do CPS. It's even bigger. There's a manufacturing over total private. We're leaving out the public sector now. And then I looked at, wait a minute, because I'd seen some other numbers. And it turns out it's weekly earnings. In the average hourly pay, there's no difference, zero. I mean, 1.65. So if manufacturing is, quote, better jobs, it's not in what our usual measure is. It's in something to do with the hours worked, overtime hours, and things like that. It's not about, I didn't do the CPS, regression kind of things, but it's pretty clear if you get back from about 20% in the establishment data of a weekly earnings thing down to 1%, you're going to get something in the CPS that'll also disappear or get very much, it has to get much smaller when you go to the hourly thing, because this has been trending down. Everyone recognizes that. Manufacturing used to be a really high wage sector, and now it's an ordinary sector in hourly pay. So you wouldn't pick it out as a place for, this is great jobs. And obviously if you've got engineers at one end, and you've got the low-skilled guys at the other end, the low-skilled guys, it's not a sensible thing as far as I can see. And then I just said, yeah, well, in Sue in her paper, she goes on, she says, well, it's got to be only the high-tech industries that she thinks are, and those with big transportation costs. I said, high-tech, big transportation costs. Okay, yeah, you're not going to restore or shoes. You're not going to, the low-tech things where it's easy to do transport. But boy, that just looks like a domestic, non-traded industry. You're saying the manufacturing where it looks domestic, non-traded, those are the ones that she and her co-authors were favorable for employment reasons. Then I just said, well, this is a place with a lot of occupational injuries, not as much as construction, not as much as mining, but these guys are doing dangerous or work. Less dangerous, I think, in the high-tech areas where the guy's just sitting there at some computer and running the whole steel mill. And then factory pollution. We saw in China where they've stopped some chemical plants. And the EPA, so much of it is about manufacturing pollution. So there was earlier said things about the green, and yeah, if we can be in the lead of green manufacturing and take adjustments for that, that has some virtues. But this has been an area where you can't, you got to estimate that and carry. And I haven't seen anything where people did this, where they said, okay, so it has some advantages along these things, but there is a pollution cost when the chemicals are, poured into the city, into the rivers, and so on. In the streams. Okay, so I took the job thing as not a good thing. Here's where I think I took seriously, or at least not so dubious. I'm more prejudicial in favor of. First thing is, a number of studies tell us there's bigger job spillovers. I came into that with the following. I knew a lot about these, the university impact studies. Where the universities, almost every university, and Berkeley has one, and Harvard has one, MIT has one, San Diego has one. It's almost every university has done one of these impact studies of, gee, the federal government gives us money, and it doesn't all go to these high-flying professors. It gets spent through the system, and we're very important in the community. And I know what the magnitudes of those, they call them employment multipliers are. you'll get 2 to 3 jobs that are not connected to the recipients of the grant, if I can phrase it right. Because the money gets filtered through, and you run it through an input-output table, it gets filtered, and so on. The input-output table, as we iterate, or you don't iterate it necessarily, you invert it, but you're following each stream along the way. And then I was doing something for some of the big California companies in a case, and I suddenly realized the industry ones tend to be 3 to 4 and sometimes higher. They're bigger. I thought, that's interesting. I haven't got a table that says, here's 50 industry impact studies, manufacturing, and here's 50 university. That was my sense. Then I found Josh Bivens a while ago had estimated an employment multiplier in manufacturing versus business services, retail trade, same kind of thing. And I say there was one of the slides this morning, they gave the same sort of stuff, not for employment, but for sort of input-output connections. And then, the manufacturing, they purchase materials in the area. They use services in the area. And then the food there's lunches for all the workers, and which then so there's a set of things you'd say it may be a good thing for local area. Then there was this paper just came out in BR, where they do some cross city areas. It's totally unconnected, but I was really geared up on what evidence is there that we get these employment things. And there's no comparison of other sectors, because they're talking about the housing market. Kerwin Charles and co-authors. And what they said was a huge fraction of the increase in unemployment. You see the statement. And you just see that's big multiplier. That is not just manufacturing. And as we've heard today, a lot of the loss of the 5 million lost jobs, most occurred before the recession. So this is spillovers. That's how I read it, at least. And then I thought, well, the experiment we'd like to do is take a manufacturing plant, take a college, university, prison. Local areas, somebody say, oh, God, we have a prison. We've got a lot of jobs for guards. And I assume other local services. And then I said, or the Bank of America, ATM machine. I don't think we get a job for anybody. But it came to your depressed town. This, to me, is the recovery question. Which would use more of the surplus labor? And the catch is the surplus labor, you could say, I'll exaggerate, its marginal product is, it's sort of like the opportunity cost is 0 to get the guys back to job. That obviously exaggerates, but, and we're not going to lower wages close to 0 to get them jobs. So there is a gap, and that's the whole way you want to read surplus labor. So you could just think of asking, I don't know what the answer is, but manufacturing, I think, comes out reasonably good. I've not seen anything that said it doesn't come out reasonably good in that domain. The other place which, and here I didn't do my homework properly. I should have gone through which S&E occupations and so on. But it's clear manufacturing is where the R&D over sales is high. And I was thinking of doing a little thing, which I didn't do, is to say, well, if we cut manufacturing down more, what happens to the national R&D ratio? Now, of course, R&D workers could then be deployed in some other areas, and that might be very good, and et cetera, et cetera. But the point is, it is indeed a place where you could say, if you believe in R&D, you have to believe it's something about manufacturing playing a special role, and then people claiming this thick ecology for innovation, intellectual commons. I've not seen any powerful evidence for that, but it resonates reasonably well with me, at least. That's something worth really doing. And then I just said, no, but it's not necessarily linked to more jobs. So, and I think one of the papers this morning made the point that, the productivity is not employment reducing. We can't, and yeah, it's negligible correlation if you do it by industries, but so you get a big growth of productivity. It doesn't necessarily cut your employment down, but it isn't a positive thing for employment. So it's good. You want to have big productivity growth is nice, and et cetera. And then we're doing some calculations, establishments within an industry, where again, you find similar kinds of things. And so I just said, hey, if you want less skilled guys, you may want to go for construction, except in Germany. I appreciate that. And to call the construction guys less skilled is also, I was walking around here, there were guys on you may walk by this, they're building something, and the guy was moving a big thing, and I was a pedestrian going beneath the thing. I thought, oh, I hope he doesn't drop that, because it'll land on my head or something. But you also, every time you see these people, you just know that's a high risk. Not to call it a skill to be able to, to be able to do some of the things they do is not right. It's a different kind of skill. I don't know what the German guys doing up there with what you mean by the high skilled guys, et cetera. Okay, then we have some evidence, from manufacturing plants of these so-called agglomeration spillovers. Lynn Zucker and Mike Darby have done things with star scientists. Andy Wang has just finished some things at NBER on NIH spending 5 or 6 years later, leading to the growth of industries, of related industries to where the NIH spending was, but where the industries didn't get any of the money. So you give money to Berkeley and a lot of biology stuff, and some biotech firms. 5 or 6 years later, you see some biotech firms, and we don't, going on. It's not huge, but so the spillovers argument for manufacturing, there's spillovers in lots of domains, and so I just said we don't know this big question of whether manufacturing is better. If what we're going to be living on are the spillovers, we want to see that that's the key thing. And if you're looking for a social product greater than private product, that's kind of what you're looking for. And so I think there's a reasonable case for the manufacturing here, but I'm not quite sure. I mean, if it came down to universities versus manufacturing, I think the job thing is bigger in the manufacturing. But yeah, we do other things that are really important for the long term, et cetera. So you worry about that. Now I want to go to policy tools. I just made a list, and you could add some more. I just, whatever it'll be. And because the key thing I'm thinking about now is the but. Okay, so let's say we had agreed that there was higher social marginal product in manufacturing, and now we start going through our list of which policies and can we do it. And then this to me is the main concern. And I said humanly corrupt. I didn't want to be attacking fellow human beings who are behaving as humans, which means corrupt in some sense. So Mike Boskin had this interesting thing where he said Washington's knack for picking losers. Of course, that was an attack on Mr. Obama at this moment. But he also went back and he said the Bush guys did it badly too, so on and so forth. Larry Summers said government is crappy VC. In fighting I think against Solyndra or some of the other things, which didn't work. And the A123 battery company, it was hailed as a great success. As of 2009, 2010, it was it is now bankrupt. The Chinese almost bought it. I have a friend who pays attention to this. I said, the Chinese bought it, didn't they? He said, no, that's a few months, that was half a year ago when they were doing it. It's now bankrupt. But the technology has been bought by, some parts of the technology have been bought by some other company. We may eventually see, some positive things coming out, but it's a complicated chain. And I don't think there was any particular corruption in that. That might be just more whatever happened. But there is, the last one was a quote from a lobbyist I cannot claim to be a friend, but whom I know, who just said this, that's the highest return. He said, just estimate it. Go ahead, you get the figures. And we're trying to get the figures. I'd love to, that the highest return you can get in the US is making some contributions. And he said, that they believe this. They believe the cheapest thing they can do. Why did they give billions of dollars in this campaign? It's better than building a $1 billion Intel fab plant, which will earn you some money and be good. But this they'll get because they'll get all. So once you go down the social marginal product greater than, so you believe it, you then God only knows what they're going to do and whose pocket it's going to appear. And that's true for the Democrats and Republicans equally alike. So that's a real problem. Then I come to, if you had an effective policy, so you got there, and I'm always about the employment aspect, because I think, okay, there's the numbers you've seen, and I said assume full employment is 140 million people, well, the 7 million jobs in this area. How many will be in manufacturing? Has anybody got an idea? Will it be, the 12.5, 13, whatever number you'd have, and then will this share be, what's it going to be in 2020, 2030? It's my reading of it all, since manufacturing employment is trending down everywhere as a share of employment, it's going to be lower. This is not going to be you're not going to turn this into a territory of lots of jobs. And this is what we see in the current excitement in parts of U.S. manufacturing. It's 3D printing. That's Silicon Valley. That's where I first learned about it. And so there's the Spar's manufacturing revolution. Well, those robots, by the way, are the robots that they're planning to put in Foxconn. Somebody mentioned earlier this morning. That's the Foxconn robot. That's going to replace the Chinese workers. And he said, boy, we bring those jobs back to the U.S., and ain't you or I are going to be getting those jobs, or any of our humans. It'll be more those robots. This is a car that they made. It's a demo car. It's not a real car. It doesn't really run. They used it in a movie, all made by 3D printing. So bang. And that's some teeth thing that they're making by 3D printing. So so that's manufacturing in some sense, but it's not going to be job creating manufacturing, because people aren't doing anything. It's the machine connected with some huge vial of materials, and it tells which materials to come out, and it does whatever it does with it. So then I come back to this. Because go back to the general equilibrium. So if we shrink these other sectors, where will people get jobs? And manufacturing as gaining its proportion. So I could see manufacturing getting a little bit. If we shrink down the banking and we shrink down the healthcare, there'll be some more. But I think most of it's still going to be in the service sector. All the ones that Adam Smith was making fun of. And then I added the ones he forgot to make fun of, us and athletes, etc. You could imagine the world of, I don't think this is realistic, but Keynes had this great vision. If we had the GDP per capita that we have today, and this was Keynes' thing on his grandchildren, everybody was going to be living like a Bloomsbury leisure class. We were going to work 20 hours a week. The Germans may be moving to that, I don't know. 20 hours, not 20 hours a week, but certain hours a week. We would do a lot more sharing of the work, et cetera. And then there is this giant issue. As things get more and more, in a world of robots, where will people get incomes, et cetera? Well, I said as robot owners, and meaning that if we're going to have another, this is just back to, I suppose, Joe Stiglitz kind of thinking we're going through this incredible transformation. And that's the most important thing. But it's a very different view of transformation. It's got to be that people have to have some ownership stakes in the new things that are replacing them. Bang, I'm almost done. Whoops. What else? What about Germany? That's the German share of manufacturing jobs falling from twice the US level in 1970, about 40% versus 20, down to 20%, where the US one now is about 10%. So Germany has had the same drop. You can even get China, and you see the drop, the manufacturing. It just is not going to be an area for great jobs growth, period, no matter what. The auto bailout, I quoted Mitt Romney's famous thing, which kissed the automobile bye, and we see the automobile of the 500,000 jobs that were pointed out grew. A lot of it's automobiles, and presumably a lot of it is the whole thing. I don't know if anybody's got a good study of this. The whole thing may be automobile related. Bang. Conclusion: I don't see any case for this on the jobs front as this is going to create great jobs particularly for lower income guys beyond the recovery. And I think there is a case I said here to stop the bleeding, and I think that's what the auto thing did. And there, because of all those spillovers and connections, it's a place you don't want to be hit. It's like picking a particular part of your body. If you got a bullet in this part, boy, we better move instantly or else you're going to die. But that doesn't mean that that part of your body should be grown relative to the other parts in the future. At best, it's going to grow, as your body grows normally. I think there is some case for this manufacturing engineering innovation, but there's no real definitive evidence. And then ... And then Michael pointed out this morning, very important, that our share of, he said our share of world manufacturing output has more or less been steady, and we're still high. And I think that's probably is true, and that's probably the truth in this specialism of manufacturing. But it's not going away, that part. What is going away are the immediate manufacturing jobs. And then I said it's only through these indirect jobs that it's going to help much in that front. So my conclusion is, manufacturing plays an important role potentially in the innovation R&D area. I think more to be said. And in recovery, it's pretty important because it's very interconnected. But it's not going to be this job savior in the future. And in any case, that was my comments. So anybody wants to be critical? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oops. Go ahead.
I was a little surprised that you dismissed the good jobs thing quite as quickly for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're mixing durable and non-durable.
Yes.
Harry Holzer. And we know non-durable are pretty lousy, and they're about 40% of the total. So if you only focused on durable, if you looked at compensation, including benefits, rather than if you didn't just look just as hourly, because hourly assumes that everyone's free to adjust.
I agree.
So if you add in all those things, I still think, and I agree with a lot of what you said, and I'll say it in my talk too, that there's an inevitable decline that's going to occur. But on the margin, and if you're talking about good jobs, the other thing is, you didn't control for education and any of the other, when you look at the averages, I think this is a place where folks can go out and get a sub-BA, an associate's degree, a certificate degree, become a machinist, and those can still be very good jobs. And I just don't know we should be dismissing it quite as quickly as you did.
Fair enough. And if you obviously did the durables, you would have been more positive, and they do the benefits in. I mean, Sue's thing, she has the benefits. She points out what twice as likely to have a pension plan, more likely to have, et cetera. And it's just to me, the striking thing was the hours were so important. I didn't realize that the people were looking at the weekly. But of course, if you cut down to the durables, you're now cutting to an even smaller fraction. We're not talking about a starting point of 12% or whatever, or 9%, I think was the number. You're now talking about maybe 6%. So it's you're focusing on a very small thing, and that could pass the test. I mean, they would say, those jobs are somewhat, and I think particularly in the recovery. Now, if we were at full employment, we wouldn't be caring in some deep sense. We wouldn't be saying privileging the few guys who are lucky enough or whatever it is to get into those good, durable goods, skilled jobs because they're going to be doing fine. They are, et cetera. But I take your comment. That's fair enough. Yeah.
My name is Steve Kessler. I'm curious about the durable jobs issue as it relates to, say, auto with the bailout. Because my understanding is that the new jobs is a tremendous pay cut, like half. So then we're talking, there's a variable that I haven't seen demonstrated about sort of a two-tiered workforce and essentially generational conflict. And in that same cohort of youth, they're paying enormous amounts of money to go to school if they're going to school versus much worse pay in terms of, I think the overwhelming majority of new jobs in general, which is not exclusive to youth, is what, $7.50 to $13.50 an hour, and that's contingent work. And just as a brief comment, I was a substitute teacher, and I was joking with one of my friends in the union. It's like substitute teachers are now the aristocracy of contingent labor.
Adjunct professors we have to similar, but I mean, yes, that's why in the recovery it's fine. If the industry and the companies do better, on basis of what unions have done in the past with these two-tier things, they would then start moving to close the gap. But this is the point. Yeah, it's generating jobs for young people. I'm sure they're not complaining at this point. I'm sure they have queues because there are no good other opportunities particularly in that part of the country. But yeah, then you would get into this two-tier issue, which is big in Korea, and it's in Japan with the regular workers and the non-regular people. And then all the economists all keep saying, well, you got to narrow those differences. And in Europe, I suppose, with the permanent jobs and the what are the contingent kinds of jobs in Spain, you want to eventually get rid of those differences, but they're a short-term crisis kind of point to help this company survive, which was a successful policy. At least it seems that way right now.
Maybe one more question, and then I'll go to the next panel. Go ahead, Rob.
I guess I'd like to challenge you in a couple of points. You talk about the fact that manufacturing wages are relatively low, and if you correct for all these differences, and yet some of that reflects other policies, such as denunionization in the United States and the openness to globalization. Both of those are responsible for a large share of the decline in manufacturing wages. So I think that if you separate that, I think if we could imagine a world where we had a unionized labor force, which might exist if, for example, we had full employment and full demand for labor, I think manufacturing would generate more good jobs for workers, as we've heard elsewhere, without college degrees, and that's one of its benefits. Other point that you made about, just a random point, about the green consequences of manufacturing, the fact that manufacturing factories are highly polluting. Again, you have to think, I think, comparatively. I've seen studies that have been done in the steel industry, and U.S. steel plants produce about a third as much carbon per ton of steel as plants in China. Now, we're going to consume steel in the cars that we drive. The question is, where are we going to make it, under what kind of pollution conditions? If we make more of it here, we'll have less global pollution.
Yeah, no, that's correct. I was thinking inside the U.S., and one of the reasons we don't want to have some kinds of manufacturing here is because, and our employers, part of the higher cost that they have is that we put EPA and good things onto them, but we have to consider that. And yes, it's a global calculation. You're turning my comment this morning around. I mean, I think it's correct. It could very well be that we want to have the steel here, and the Chinese should also want to have the steel here rather than polluting theirs. The union one is, I think, a little different because I would think if we had a vibrant union movement, and I think most union leaders would agree, though I haven't asked them, and if they had a choice between manufacturing or organizing Walmart and getting the clearly domestic, where there is no this foreign competition, because we're not going to do away with the open, the world trade and so on, and there are always going to be that driver at the heads in the highly traded sector, that it would be much better to have Walmart. And then you could push wages up quite a bit for those set of workers. Whereas, the unions are very rational in their agreements, and including the agreements for the automobile taking the two-tier, because guns are at their heads, and some of the guns are international, pressures, and they just have to face that. Whereas Walmart, they don't have to face that, and there's huge profits for the Walmart companies. Walmart making a lot of money. 4 of the top 20 billionaires in the world are in the Fortune list of Walmart members, or 4 of the top 30, whatever number it is. There are a whole bunch of them who are up there, and they could have a few less billion and pay their workers and do better. And so there, I think it is more the domestic ones that I would stress, and that's where the union movement has really failed to take advantage of. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.